Well, it's true. Been for law for many years, but nobody wanted to listen. I guess they'll know now.
But they'll say they still haven't got the proof.
Yeah.
For us to maintain our way of living, we must tell lies to each other. The lies are necessary as barriers to truth. Without these lies, deplorable acts would become impossibilities. So we lie to ourselves about the atrocities that we are doing to the environment, and indeed to other peoples, in order to maintain our way of life. And in many respects, you know, this is when the environment was invented. There is no environment in a very real sense. We're all part of this entity that we think of as the environment. But when we really think as an environment out there, as separate from human beings over here, then we build up a kind of mental imagery that says we can do damage out there that isn't really going to affect us over here.
Oh boy, it's a long history. I hope you have a lot of tape.
No, I don't.
But anyway, yeah, it was totally different lifestyle compared to today. Those days we didn't have running water at the house, no electricity, or it's a lot easier today than those days. And we lived off the land.
There's a lot of stuff to do. If you enjoy the bush, that is. There's not too many people that enjoy the bush, the life. Probably with the bugs and the work that comes behind it, where you have to set up camp and take down camp, all that stuff. My family enjoys the bush, like the Martin family. They're out there a lot doing things. They were raised in a bush. I was raised by their parents, so there's like, my family does, and there is a lot of men that's out there that do this today.
Oh, it was great because that's our livelihood. To travel in the rivers and hunt in the river. You know, you could go anywhere because there's no roads around here. No other way to get around but by rivers.
We would live off the land. That's what we would do. And I remember my grandmother dipping the water off the side of the boat and giving us the water to drink, and we would think nothing of it. I'm understanding today that's not something we would ever do, because we certainly would be drinking sludge.
Well, for a number of years, you know, quite a few years, ever since the oil companies moved below Fort McMurray, there have been a lot of changes here. It's getting worse and worse. There's more things that we see that's polluting our area. That's drifting right on the water, and God only knows what's in the water. Throughout the years that I had fish, I never seen things like that getting worse. Quite a few deformed fish. We said it's deformed, but nobody would listen. It's sad. You know, oil companies are going to destroy our industry. That's our industry.
I think if there's anybody who could suggest that any segment of society is under assault by the oil sands development, it would be Fort Chipewyan. Because we are the ones who feel first the effects of if there's any contaminants in the water from the oil sands development because we're downstream first from all the oil sands activity. We know that the government was aware of the oil sands 100 years ago. They signed treaty with us only after they had knowledge of the value of the oil sands that they discovered where we come from. Our people knew of oil sands. We used the actual oil, the thick oil that we saw on the banks of the Athabasca River, but we didn't place the same value on those types of property as Western society does.
Most surface mining in Fort McMurray for tar sand is what we call truck and shovel. So you've got large shovel excavators and haul trucks. It hasn't always been that way. The bucket wheels that you see up near St. Crude are sort of a previous generation of technology. An operation like Suncor will have upwards of 60 trucks and 13, 14 large excavating shovels. So that's the basic way that the tar sand and the overburden gets moved to where it needs to go. It goes into our extraction plant where it's mixed with water. The basic process is actually quite simple. The extraction process is at its core is fairly straightforward. You're using hot water and steam to separate the oil from the sand. There's really not a lot of stuff. I mean, if you took a handful of tar sand, there's really not that much in it. Typically, you've got your mineral, your sands, and fine clay particles. You've got water and bitumen, and there's really not too much else. You pull out the bitumen, and really you have not much more than sand and water left over. That becomes your tailings, which is then transported to a tailings pond. There will be some oil in the tailings ponds because your recovery is not 100%. You don't quite get all of the bitumen out, so some of it ends up getting sent back out with the tailings. There's not a tremendous amount of opportunity to create an enormous environmental problem in the mining operation. We're hauling dirt around is what we're doing. I mean, at its core, that's most of what we do.
Canadians, by and large, are not a very environmentally sensitive people. We are basically engineers, and we engineer landscapes and we change landscapes. We dam rivers, we cut down forests, and now we're digging up a forest for the tar sands.
In Alberta, I think the situation is more like what the situation was in Alaska prior to the Exxon Valdez, where this was seen as a pretty much huge economic boon to the economy with very little downside. I strongly suspect that the environmental downside will come to light and that it will ultimately put the Exxon Valdez to shame in terms of scale once the full impact of the tar sands development becomes known.
I think if many Albertans who are benefiting financially from the oil sands development were to fly over that area, even people who've been desensitized by urban life cannot help but be impressed by the absolute devastation of the boreal forest and ultimately of watercourses and just the ecosystems.
We just passed some of the more devastating stuff that I've ever seen. This is the second time doing it, and it's I thought I could handle it this time, but there was a point there where I had to not look at anybody because I couldn't actually take it emotionally.
You know, it's a no-brainer. Suncor should not be where they're at. Suncor shouldn't be on the river. Suncor shouldn't have built a tar island dike on the river. It's built over top of a back channel of the Athabasca. I mean, they're trying to reclaim the Tar Island Dike and a big settling pond that was built behind it, but this massive behemoth settling pond is continually leaching into the Athabasca River. So, I mean, it's been mentioned how many thousands of liters per day is going into the Athabasca River, and has been for many, many, many years.
When these facilities are built, if a large containment pond of some sort of tailings pond is built, they do implement drainage systems and detection and recirculation. And I mean, they are designing those things currently to be able to detect and recirculate. I'm assuming that there's a third party somewhere involved that's checking that, but you know, it's a bit away from my area expertise. I really don't know.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the technology that's involved in these ponds was explained to me, and I think in a very effective way. All of the ponds have a certain degree of seepage because they are located over sand, but there are straws with pumps attached to them, multiple straws under that suck the water out and then pump it back into the top. And Mr. Speaker, it was explained to me it's not unlike when you have a Slurpee and you suck all the water out and you're left with a bunch of dry ice in the bottom of the glass.
We do know that the tailings ponds leak. That's a fact. Nobody can deny that.
In terms of seepage into groundwater, I don't know. I know we have groundwater monitoring programs to monitor the quality of groundwater to determine if there's any issues. I'm not responsible for the data, but as far as I know, there aren't. But we don't put in rubber liners in the bottoms of the ponds or anything like that.
I mean, we have people that call us, say, can we put a liner system in? And we can say absolutely, and we explain to them what it is and what the properties are. But we always tell them that even the best liner system is probably going to leak somewhere because they're not foolproof.
Suncor is allowed to discharge 300 kilograms of oil and grease daily into the Athabasca River. This is what they're allowed to do. So you cumulatively put that all together, yeah, it's not good.
I think the only way you can say this is positive is not to get any data and then pretend that because no one studied it, that it hasn't happened. But if you look at the record for groundwater contamination from feedlots that are relatively small by comparison, it's obvious that developments the size of this have to have very significant contamination of surface and groundwater happening.
It is monitored by Alberta Environment, and if it's in Alberta, you know, they do have some standards as far as I know, and they certainly approve or regulate individual projects on their design basis. Like I say, I don't think there's a set standard that if you're going to develop a plant, this is what you need to do. It's more, if you're going to develop a plant, you can't contaminate the environment, and then what are you going to do, and then we'll decide if that's adequate. To my knowledge, that's more of the process.
Due to this whole craze towards privatization and cutbacks in monitoring and in biologists and in general support staff, the capacity of the Alberta government to monitor what's changing has actually diminished significantly. So there's very little monitoring conducted by the government. Instead, what we've got are these so-called private partnerships with industry. On the lower Athabasca River, there's a program called RAMP, the Regional Aquatics Monitoring Program. They look at a lot of different things having to do with the landscape and the river, but there are many methodological and scientific problems with that whole program.
Well, there's only 2 people and 5 huge tar sands mines puking out 1,700 or 1,600 incidences a year. All you do is manage the paper, push the paper, file the paper, close out the file, move on to the next one. Your boss is happy, everybody's happy. You just move paper.
I have faith that they're doing something, but I'm like a normal citizen in that respect. I'm just kind of hoping they're doing the best.
Will the minister do the right thing and bring an end to the hands-off approach of companies self-monitoring and self-reporting on tailings pond issues?
The Honourable Minister. Good question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we had quite a discussion on this matter during the discussion of my estimates last night. The matter, the actual issue here is not the self-monitoring, because that's quite common practice in the way not only Alberta Environment but every environment department around the world operates. The issue is, do we audit, and do we have in place the necessary checks and balances to ensure that that self-reporting is accurate? No other different way than self-reporting of income tax is done with taxpayers in Canada and other jurisdictions.
The Honourable Leader.
Well, to the same minister. I'm sure the minister agrees that bringing in self-reporting for speeding on our streets wouldn't work. So why does he think letting industry self-report on something this toxic and on this scale actually works?
We don't really have water quality rules in this country. We have guidelines. And of course, the difference between a guideline and a law is that guidelines are not legally enforceable.
This is a province where the political world rules. And it filters into every decision-making process that ever was. A decision about whether to charge a company, whether to take someone to court. Those decisions aren't yours to make as an investigator. You might dig up all the evidence. You might interview all the people, and you might have the perfect file to take forward to a lawyer, a Crown Counsel, and someone else makes that decision for you. And it all depends on where they're politically connected, it seemed. If it's a large corporation, someone over the last 30 years have had some sort of connection to them in the political realm, they don't go forward with the file.
Last Monday, 500 birds landed on a toxic tailings pond near Fort McMurray, and fewer than 5 came out alive. The same day, the minister was writing on his website that, and I quote, "Alberta is proving to the world that you can produce energy in an environmentally responsible manner," end quote. My first question is to the Minister of Sustainable Resource Development. Given the massive scale and lethal toxicity of the oil sands tailings ponds, does he agree with the Minister of International and Intergovernmental Relations that this is environmentally responsible?
Mr. Speaker, we should probably take up a collection for wax removal tools for the Leader of the Opposition. He seemed to hear any of the answers that were given to precisely those questions last week. We have a system in place. There were conditions of operation at the tailings pond for waterfowl mitigation and deterrence. They appear not to have worked. There's an investigation underway.
300 ducks, see how that played out throughout the world. If you knew how many ducks and animals and wildlife died in those ponds throughout the year, it'd probably boggle your mind.
I think what will probably smarten us up is that at some point we'll probably have some natural disaster that will trigger a major leakage from one of those tailings ponds, something like an earthquake or a 1 in 100-year flood or something like that.
Well, unlike Prince William Sound, where you had a single pollution release that was in limited scope, and then it was surrounded by a very healthy, almost pristine environment. That created a situation where the cards were sort of stacked for the environment to recover. In Alberta, you've got a much more fundamental disturbance that is ongoing over a much longer period of time, and it's expanding.
You're looking at staffing issues. You're looking at, people not trained to do their job appropriately. Management focused on the other end of the equation. Industry or a government not being able to monitor, or not monitoring. Monitoring organizations not telling the truth. There's a big failure here waiting to happen.
I think this will be one of the foremost environmental catastrophes in the history of the planet. Right up there with Chernobyl and Love Canal or Bhopal.
coming up to Fort Chip, when I started coming up here at the beginning of the millennium, I had not been here before. I did not know what to expect. I found it to be utterly more peaceful and you know, relaxed in terms of pace compared to Fort McMurray. And being able to focus and being able to take the time and to sort of liaise with the nurses here. There's a great team, absolutely amazing team at the nursing station.
Perfect. And one that works at the store?
Yes, thank you. This doctor means a lot to the community. Before Noonie Health contracted with Dr. O'Connor, we would get the occasional doctor in that Health Canada would send up. So there were different doctors, you know, one doctor one month, somebody else the next month. We never had what other people would call a family physician, where this is, you know, your doctor. It's like, well, when you go out and you're asked who's your doctor, and you just say, well, whoever happened to be at the nursing station that month. So since we've started getting Dr. O'Connor, this has been a regular doctor. We can say he's our family doctor. He actually sees everybody in Fort Chipewyan.
Either or, you know, maybe there could have been something on the Q-tip, you know, that you... I started to document the illnesses I was coming across in the community. And then out of the blue, finding my first case of cholangiocarcinoma. That very scared me. Now, cholangiocarcinoma is a cancer of the biliary tract. It's a very insidious and rapidly progressive cancer that's often very difficult to diagnose. And by the time the diagnosis is made, very often the patient is beyond treatment. I actually saw 2 cases in the community, 2 tissue sample documented cases. The stats tell us that I should not be seeing this disease any more than 1 in 100,000. We have a population for CHIP that by the municipality's census in Wood Buffalo, it stands at 744. If there is not a problem, that's fine. Then we'll continue just, you know, treating and, you know, our usual day-to-day stuff. If there is a problem, my question was, are we dealing with something that's just happened as a result of pure bad luck? Could it be something related to lifestyle issues? Is there a genetic background to this, or could it be environmental? I constantly think back to the large practice. At one point, I had 9,000 active files of patients in Fort McMurray. You know, I'd be scratching the bottom of the barrel trying to come up with figures that were a fraction of what I'm seeing up here.
We know there's a lot of cancer in the community. We all know that. Nobody's going to deny that, no matter who you talk to. Is it higher than most isolated communities? I'm hoping at some point Health Canada, Alberta Health and Wellness, and working together with our nursing station will actually get the real numbers, because right now a lot of people die in Fort McMurray or somewhere else. They don't stay here when they get really sick for the reason that we don't have a hospital. We asked the government to look into the cancer rates, and actually, instead of doing an actual study to see how many cancers we have in the community, what they did was they pulled up their existing data to see how many cancers they had from there. Before they presented that to us, they said they did acknowledge that this is what we've got. It doesn't necessarily mean this is what's true. That's what we heard.
And similarly, the federal government, Health Canada in particular, who's responsible for delivery of healthcare services to First Nations in Canada, has played a very minimal role, if any, in attending the many community meetings that we've had with Alberta Health and Wellness to address some of the health concerns.
Because the more questions we ask, the less answers we're getting. It's like a lot of people in the community feel like there is a cover-up going on. We're going to do our own study, and we're going to try and keep it completely independent from industry or from Health Canada, which I'm finding is very hard to do because Health Canada has so much of the numbers and the information that we need.
My impression from studying the data and also talking to a lot of people in the community is that the Alberta government missed quite a few cases of cancer. The So their numbers are actually lower than is reality in the community.
I think this community deserves some studying, and I find myself echoing the previous two calls for a baseline health study of this community.
Any physician who has the guts to step forward and say, I think there's a problem, I care for these people, and I believe that we have rare forms of cancer here that shouldn't be here, and I believe that there might be an environmental cause. That person is just raising a concern. He's asking for involvement from the greater community to try to figure out what the problem is.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thank you.
And instead, what he's met with is government, Health Canada or the Alberta government coming down on this doctor to try to silence him. And when that happened, I said to myself, I have to get involved. I just have to find out what's going on here. When we were doing samples in the vicinity of industry, we found that the snow was gray. It wasn't your typical white snow that you would expect. And as we cut down through the snow, we could see there were multiple strata throughout the snow profile, indicating that this fallout of contaminated dust over the region is a process that happens throughout the winter. Wherever you look, you will see clear cutting, you will see stripping of the land, you will see burning of the forest, piled up, just getting rid of it as quickly as they can, complete obliteration of water courses, and an acrid smell of blue haze in the air all the time from smokestacks that are popping up everywhere. We know that in that dust there are a suite of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, other hydrocarbons of concern, and heavy metals. And that dust is lifting up from either from the tailings ponds themselves or coming from industrial emissions, spreading across the region, settling into the snow, and then when spring comes, all of these contaminants melt with the snow, run into the river and run downriver. So there's probably a real pulse of contaminants that come down the river at the time of breakup.
There's a great deal that we don't know about how these chemicals move through the environment, what the different exposure pathways are, and how they interact. And if it were me living in Fort Chip, I would want to know a heck of a lot more about how those pathways might be getting to me and what combination of chemicals being mobilized by tar sands mining I might be ingesting, either through the air or through water or through the food I eat.
There was always a concern of our scientists, we call them, which are our elders who have lived off the land, because they live off the land. They know exactly what kind of weather it's going to be, when to go hunting, where the best season for this type of animal or waterfowl for that matter. They knew it by, like they know the back of their hand. So they knew there was something wrong.
You know, I'm not a scientist, but I wasn't born yesterday, what they release in the water. As Native people, it's our livelihood, what we live off the land. provides food and many plentiful things to the human being.
Bile duct or cholangiocarcinoma, liver cancer, urinary tract and skin cancers, vascular diseases, and type 2 diabetes. PAHs are a large group of organic compounds, meaning they have a carbon atom, that are formed in some geologic deposits such as oil sands, and can also be created when you burn things. So if you, for example, are doing a barbecue and you get a nice charcoaly surface on your barbecue, on your meat, there are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in that, and they're not good to eat. So they do come not only from tar sands, but they come from combustion. These items don't dissolve in water, they tend to bind to organic matter, and that's important. Also on little particles of silt. They can accumulate in the tissue of organisms. Most of the leaders in the community were surprised, to say the least. Well, let me rephrase that. They were saddened. They weren't too surprised. They had suspicions for a long time, but they felt that they weren't being told the truth.
Because we're not mainstream or white man scientists, we can't just put our finger on it. Every time you come out to say that, then you have to go through the legal thing, the legal action. Legal action requires your white man side of, pardon me.
Even trying to get the funding for a study was a little bit difficult. Health Canada wanted claim on all the raw data on just everything, and there were so many questions. They wouldn't just give us money to do a simple study.
If you look at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency standards for subsistence traditional users, they have the most stringent guidelines, and it turns out that all the walleye, all the female whitefish, and 90% of the male whitefish exceed the mercury consumption guidelines.
The mercury levels and the arsenic levels are high. We know now that, pregnant moms shouldn't be eating fish and wild meat. And we know that nobody should be drinking water from the lake, especially this end of the lake, or from the Athabasca River. We know the toxins are higher in the lake than they are in the river because they do settle here.
And it's known that exposure to these chemicals can lead to reproductive and birth defects, decreased body weight, and harmful effects on skin, body fluids, and your immune system. There are also, many of them are potent cancer-causing agents.
I think it's really important that the world knows that we don't just eat fish once in a while, and we don't just eat moose meat once in a while. It's something that we eat every day, and it's not just a small little piece either. It's a lot of fish and a lot of meat.
Yes, Jackson?
Kevin, is there any way to detect mercury in fish when you're cleaning the fish?
Not when you're cleaning it. No, it would have to be analyzed by a lab.
So no more fish?
We'll get into that in some detail. And so when I told them what I had found in terms of the water quality and the contaminants in the wildlife and the sediments, their second reaction after sadness was, what do we do now? What do we tell the people?
An elder that was in my office this morning said, it doesn't matter with our old folks like me. He said, we're just going to keep eating the meat and eating the fish. It doesn't matter, but the young ones need to know that they can't do this anymore.
A little bit more until the flap opens.
The message I was delivering to the people was not a happy one. They are being subjected to contaminants that endanger their lives and the lives of future generations. The old way of living was not safe anymore.
Can the minister tell us categorically that ground and surface water in the Athabasca River has not been contaminated? Mr. Environment Minister.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have done extensive amounts of testing of the water in the Athabasca River. We continue to do an extensive amount of testing, and there is nothing that we have that indicates that there is any reason to believe that there is an impact on the quality of the water in that river as a result of the industrial activity in that region.
In this study, we found the evidence that I expected, that the mines were causing an effect on the river. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, mercury, toxic metals like zinc and lead all increased.
The approach has been let the market decide what's going to happen in Alberta. The federal government is going to take a hands-off approach to it all, and we'll just go ahead and provide more and more energy for the United States. And we won't ask a lot of questions about the implications of this in terms of water, in terms of our economy, in terms of labor standards, in terms of its impact on the boreal forest and northern peoples. We just won't ask those questions. We'll just take the money from the oil being produced right now and say, look, prosperity, isn't this a great thing?
What happened to the land? Can't breathe the air. Why don't we care? Out of your mind, can't take back time. lost all the birds and gulls. This is our voice. Oh, it is not our choice. This is our voice. It is not our choice. Can't eat the fish. Empty, empty is our dish. Here, our pain. This, oh, this is insane. Out of your mind, oh, can't take back time. Out of your mind, I can't reclaim mankind. Well, here's the water. Whoa, whatever happened to the land? I can't breathe the air. Why don't we care? This is our voice. Oh, it is not our choice. This is our voice. It is not our choice.
We know that the government was aware of the oil sands 100 years ago. They signed treaty with us only after they had knowledge the value of the oil sands that they discovered where we come from. Our people knew of oil sands. We used the actual oil, the thick oil that we saw on the banks of the Athabasca River.
Most surface mining in Fort McMurray for tar sand is what we call truck and shovel. So you've got large shovel excavators and haul trucks. There's not a tremendous amount of opportunity to create an enormous environmental problem in the mining operation. We're hauling dirt around is what we're doing. I mean, at its core, that's most of what we do.
Canadians, by and large, are not a very environmentally sensitive people. We are basically engineers, and we engineer landscapes and we change landscapes.
I think the situation is more like what the situation was in Alaska prior to the Exxon Valdez, where this was seen as a huge economic boon to the economy with very little downside.
I think if many Albertans who are benefiting financially from the oil sands development were to fly over that area, even people who've been desensitized by urban life cannot help but be impressed by the absolute devastation of the boreal forest and ultimately water courses and just the ecosystems.
You know, it's a no-brainer. Suncor should not be where they're at. Suncor shouldn't be on the river. Suncor shouldn't have built a Tar Island dike on the river. It's built over top of a back channel of the Athabasca.
We don't really have water quality rules in this country. We have guidelines. And of course, the difference between a guideline and a law is that guidelines are not legally enforceable.
We have done extensive amounts of testing of the water in the Athabasca River, and there is nothing that we have that indicates that there is any reason to believe that there is an impact on the quality of the water in that river as a result of the industrial activity in that region.
The approach has been let the market decide what's going to happen in Alberta, and we won't ask a lot of questions about the implications of this in terms of water, in terms of our economy, and in terms of its impact on the boreal forest and northern peoples. We just won't ask those questions. We'll just take the money from the oil being produced right now and say, look, prosperity, isn't this a great thing?
Mr. Speaker, community members and local doctors in Fort Chipewyan have been raising their concerns for almost a decade about the high rates of cancer that erupted after oil production began near the Athabasca River. Their concerns were not taken seriously, and only now, amid protests on the steps of the legislature, does the government realize this is not a problem they can continue to brush under the carpet.
Today's government campaigns the oil over the environment, profits for foreign companies over the health of its own citizens.
The effects of oil on humans is not well understood at all.
Should this surprise anyone? No. I suppose 1,200 people downstream from billions of dollars development are perhaps merely a nuisance.
And studies where people are exposed to crude oil into their diet typically are in countries that don't have the resources nor the desire to find out the answer to those sorts of questions.
There's nothing normal about what is going on in Fort Chipewyan, and it's about time Stelmach and whichever government comes to sit on Monday takes their heads out of the tar sands.